Hello everyone, welcome to Wind Down Wednesdays. I'm your host Paula Taylor and this is episode 173. So we are going to be doing a really powerful exercise today for those of you in the Spiritual Integration Sanctuary. If you want to get in on that, if you want to continue not only enjoying the show, but accessing bonus episodes and the powerful activations that we do together every week, join our Spiritual Integration Sanctuary. There's a link in the podcast notes. You also get access to some exclusive content and exclusive discounts. We are growing a 5D community, and we would love to have you join us. And in fact, that is what I thought I was going to talk about this week, 5D community. That topic is still to come, but I realized that I just took a huge risk going to Cambodia, having all these experiences, and I had this inspiration hit. So today we are talking about courage and the 5D. And you might notice we've been talking about the 5D for quite some time, and we're basically in series mode. I think of it, we're talking about a series of topics and how they relate to the 5D. If you're new to the show and you don't know exactly what I'm talking about, you can go back. We did a show a while ago where I called it, What's the Deal with the 3D, 5D Timeline Shift or Split? That show goes into a lot of detail about what I'm talking about, but just kind of as a shorthand, 3D is the term that we have agreed to use kind of collectively for the state of being that we are leaving. 5D, the state of being we're going into. This is an internal shift. We're going to go into that a little bit more today, but essentially 3D means kind of constricted, contracted, fearful, running on cultural and personal programming, kind of being in a state of triggered trauma, reaction, things like that. 5D means kind of coming into this more expanded, loving, unconditional love, less fearful, moving beyond the ego space or this programming and into this more collective space of love and support and expansion. Very shorthand. If you want more, go back and watch that episode or listen to the episode, What's the Deal with the 3D, 5D Timeline Split? So for today's show, I'm going to use a couple of pictures of myself and talk about this journey. And I will tell you, I was working with a client earlier this week, and it's always interesting to me how I get the pieces. It's like I get the pieces of a puzzle, and then all of a sudden they integrate in my mind, and I'm like, this is a podcast topic. This is going to make a great show. It also feels a little bit vulnerable and risky to me, which is why I knew I needed to do it. And I might get emotional while I'm talking about these things today, which sometimes happens. And my intention is always to model that that's okay. It's okay to get emotional. It's okay to let those emotions come up and express them. And it's okay to find the space to kind of move on from that. You'll notice sometimes I get emotional. I take a couple breaths and we keep going. So I was working with this client earlier this week, and the energy has been really, really heavy. It's been really intense. It's been very dense. Energetically, it feels a little bit like we're being pushed on, like we're kind of under this, like, I don't know the image that's coming to me is like that thing that shrinks the cars into little blocks, or sometimes I get the Star Wars image of they're in that trash compactor room and the walls are pressing in. It has been very intense and very heavy and very dense. And unfortunately, that's not going to change for a while, because we are in this space collectively where we are being asked to confront the shadow, to confront the 3D, the fear-based cultural programming, personal programming, history of trauma, all of that stuff, in order to move beyond that. And we've been talking about how do we move beyond that. We've been talking about how, yes, this is a collective invitation to shift, but it's really an internal shift. And I firmly believe that the way to get the collective to shift is to work on your own internal shift and then see how that ripples out. I have actually a good story about that that kind of illustrates that today. But I was working with this client, and like everybody I've been working with, this is pretty much universal recently. The energetic field, the auric field, the field around the body is very constricted. It's very contracted. There's all of this density, and it's actually pushing on our field, And for most of us, probably all of us, at least to some extent, it's constricting our field. It's making the energetic field around our bodies kind of smaller and closer into the body. And as you know, I use this analogy all the time. If you take a rubber bouncy ball in a small closet and you throw it, it's going to go bing, 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 bing. So when your field gets smaller, it's like stepping into the closet with that bouncy ball, and stuff just starts bouncing around, and it brings up a lot of stuff. It can feel like anxiety. It can also feel more like a freeze shutdown mode where you're just exhausted. You can't get out of bed. You're sleeping more than usual. You have some depression coming up. So all of this is essentially having too much energy in too small of a space. So with everybody I've been working with recently, and I always do this, but it's really more apparent now, I have been working to help them expand their energetic field, to allow the space around their body to get bigger so that there's more space for the energy to move. So the second part of the analogy with the bouncy ball is that if I take that same rubber bouncy ball into a stadium and I throw it, it's not even going to come back to me because there's so much more space. So the bigger your field is, the more space you have for energy to move around. So that's just an energetic anatomy thing. But here's the interesting thing that came up around this 3D, 5D shift. I was working with a client this week, and I was working to make her field bigger, to kind of help her have more space for her energy to move around. And after the session, she came out and she said to me, and she's another practitioner, so she's very energy savvy. She came out and she said to me, "It's really interesting. I could tell that you were working out in my field. I could feel the expansion. I could feel that energy kind of moving out. But my internal experience was that I just kept dropping deeper and deeper and deeper into myself. And by the end of it, I was so deep that I kind of lost my conscious awareness of what was happening until you started playing the bowls, because I always play bowls at the end of the session, partly to help people come back, partly to help kind of just seal the space and clear anything that's left that needs to be cleared. And it's just a very ceremonial way to kind of end the session." And she said, from a distance, I kind of heard the bowls and then I came back up. And I thought that was such an interesting and wise kind of take on how this 3D to 5D transition is going. This is an internal shift. And what happens, somewhat paradoxically, is that the deeper in you go, the deeper down you excavate, the deeper inside yourself you are able to travel and access energetically, the more expansion that allows for in your field. And the energetic anatomical shift of this 3D to 5D is coming out of that dense constricted vibration and into a more expanded kind of open vibration. And I thought that was so interesting. And then the couple of stories I'm going to tell you today really illustrate that idea of how we actually need to go deep. We need to go down. We need to excavate. We need to go inward in order to expand. And I feel like this is one of those things I've probably been talking around for a while, but I don't know that I've ever come right out and said this. And the reason I'm calling this episode Courage in the 5D is because every step of this process requires an immense amount of courage. Going internally, looking at yourself, looking at your programming, looking at your trauma history, looking at the ancestral things that have been passed down, looking at past life issues, all of these things are held in the body energetically and in the field, but generally the densest is held in the body. So it takes an immense amount of courage to go inward, to go on that deep journey of excavation, to even see those things, to dig those things up. Then it takes even more courage to do the work of whatever you want to call it, accepting, releasing, sending love to them, allowing them to expand, transmutation. There's all sorts of words that essentially mean allowing from that space the expansion to happen. I see the density, I recognize it, and I allow this to expand. And that's another thing that we've been talking about, is this shift from the 3D, which is an either or space, good or bad, light or dark, yes or no, either or, into the 5D space, which is a yes and space. It is, yes, I have these dense programmed beliefs, And I may never release them fully, but as long as I can see them and understand them, I have the capacity to and with them. Yes, I have this deep belief, and I can also expand because I'm willing to look at it. I'm willing to soften to it, to send love to it. And that alone allows me space to expand. So as usual, I'm starting off in this really abstract, and I want to make this concrete for you. So I have two stories to tell, and different stories, but both illustrate this concept. And I had intended to print these pictures out so I could show them on the video to the Spiritual Integration Sanctuary who can see the episodes of the podcast, but I've posted them in the groups for you to see. I am not looking at them. I'll be talking about them from memory, but feel free to look at those pictures if you want a visual. I'll describe them a little bit. And then for those of you listening to the podcast later, I will be posting these pictures on Instagram. I will put a link to that in the show notes if you want to see these pictures that I'm talking about. So I'm just going to jump into the first picture, tell you about that, tell you about the second picture. And what I'm going to talk about is this journey, this internal journey I had of looking at these pictures and starting out in the 3D with those program beliefs, those restricted beliefs, those fearful beliefs, those judgments of myself, and how when I was able to dig down deeper, I was able to find these really expansive, amazing 5D meanings in these images. So one of the amazing things that they offered, I just went to the Global Crystal Bowl Symposium in Cambodia. It was an amazing experience. I'm sure you'll be hearing more about that. Very life-changing, very expansive, very 5D. And I will be talking about 5D community at some point in the future. And kind of telling you a little bit more about how they did such a great job of helping to create that and what it looked like and what it meant, because we've been talking about figuring that out, and I think people are still figuring that out. It's kind of trial and error. We're figuring it out as we go. But one of the amazing things they did was that they hired a couple of professional photographers to photograph throughout the entire week that we were there. And as somebody who I don't tend, especially when we're doing sightseeing things, I absolutely take pictures, and I took some really great pictures of the temples we went to and some of those things. But I don't tend to be somebody who stops in an experience to photograph, and I certainly don't get pictures of myself very often unless someone offers or I'm really drawn to it. I like to be in the moment. And I don't like pictures of myself. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So we just got the link to all these amazing images. They were so well organized by day 1 through 7. I've got a dog messing with my camera here. They were really well organized by day, so you could go in and see each day the photographs that they took. And there was a variety of photographs of the whole group, of people presenting, of the excursions we took, people in the temples. And one of the things they tried to do was to get, I think, at least maybe 1 or 2 photos individually of each person there, which is amazing because I think there were about 60 people in total there. So that was a monumental undertaking, and really grateful for them having kind of the foresight to do that, and for the photographers who followed us around on these really long days of, shooting. And there's something about a candid photo especially that's always really interesting, as opposed to posing for a photo, because there's a lot of baggage that comes up around that. So the first thing I'm going to say, I do not like pictures of myself. I never have. I never feel like I look like myself in pictures. Like I might look at myself in the mirror and think, wow, you're looking pretty good today, and someone takes a picture of me and all of that goes out the window. I have a very long history of body image issues and eating disordered behavior that I've talked about on the show. So I am not a fan. I'm not a 3D fan of pictures of myself. And so the first thing I did when I looked through all these pictures, and there were 2 pictures that were of me individually, and I did not like either one of them. I had a strong I don't like these response to both of these pictures. But because of all the work that I've done and I'm doing, and all of this idea of excavating, I actually sat with each of these pictures individually, and I dug down deeper, and then I found this really amazing, expansive kind of 5D space within these pictures that lived just next to my 3D stuff. I didn't have to let go of that completely. I don't have to view myself in a favorable light on first glance in order to dig deeper and find the 5D expansion, which is really amazing. I'm sorry, I've got a dog. What do you want? What's the matter? I'll be right back. Sorry, everybody. Okay, you better be quiet and you better not get your... So I have 3 dogs and 2 of them hang out in their crates while I film because otherwise they play and wrestle and make a lot of mischief. And then I have a little guy who usually just sits in here quietly, but he's being a little whiny, so I had to let him out. All right, so back to the topic. So I'm going to talk about the first picture. And in this image, I am standing in front of a microphone. I'm kind of gesturing. Looks like I'm talking. I may have been singing. I'm not sure. My eyes are open, so I'm thinking I was talking because a lot of times when I sing, my eyes close. And so let me tell you the first thing my 3D impressions of this picture. My mind just went blank. So when I first looked at this picture, right away I was like, I have a weird look on my face. I don't like that. I look really red and hot and sweaty. And if there were 3 words that summed up my physical condition experience in Cambodia, it was red, hot, and sweaty, because it is a very hot, humid place. And we had air conditioning inside, but you're kind of going in and out all day. We were climbing stairs all day. It was an intense experience. So I felt like I was kind of hot and sweaty the whole time. I looked at the shirt I was wearing and I thought, wow, that is a wide, boxy shirt. And I look gigantic. And I will tell you, no matter what size my body is, one of the first things I always notice in a photo, one of the first questions I ask myself is, how fat do I look, or where do I look fat? So that came in right away. I thought I looked cute in that shirt, and when I saw the picture, I was like, wow, you look like a gigantic box. And I don't typically dress. I dress more for comfort and function generally than I do for style. There were some really amazing stylish people there with these really awesome heat-friendly outfits, and that was a day that I actually tried to look a little more stylish, and when I looked at the picture, instantly I was like, I did not like how I looked in that picture. So those are my 3D impressions of that picture. I looked at that picture and instantly was like, I don't like that picture. I don't look good. It's not flattering. I don't like it. But then as I sat with it a little more and I got into that excavation mode, this is a part where I might get emotional. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I saw deeper in that allowed me to expand. So as I went deeper, as I excavated deeper beyond my beliefs, I was able to find that expansive space. You are just being really needy. Okay. Needy dog again. So as I looked deeper in this photo, the first thing I saw was the courage it took for me to go to this event. I knew one person vaguely, my mentor Trish Devney, who I mention on the show a lot, my sound mentor, who I have really only met a handful of times, generally in a group setting. I've had short one-on-one interactions with her. She might recognize me in a crowd. She didn't actually know that I lived in Tucson, which I thought was funny because I've never told her that. I've come to a lot of her things, but I've never been like, hey, I also live in Tucson. I'd never seen her one-on-one for a session. Pardon the squeaking dog in the background. So she was the only person I even vaguely knew going to this thing. Essentially, I knew no one. I knew her by sight, and she was wonderful, and it's always amazing. I learned the term pedestaling while I was there, like we're putting someone on a pedestal, and I have been guilty of that many times in my life, and it's always kind of a relief and also just amazing to get to know somebody that you maybe did put on a pedestal a little bit and realize that they're just as authentic and loving and caring and expansive and amazing as you imagine they were or thought they were, by just kind of seeing their public persona and then seeing a week long and getting some one-on-one interaction and private interaction and just seeing them as a person and recognizing that they really are just as wonderful as you assumed they were. That's always nice because it doesn't always happen that way. So I flew around the world by myself, knowing pretty much no one. I showed up to this thing. The second night, they had an open mic night. And before I went, my guides told me, you're going to need to share dimensional frequency expansion. And I was like, I don't know how I'm going to do that. I'm not a presenter. I'm not going to shove it down people's throats. And as soon as the open mic night thing was announced, they were like, that's where you're going to do it. You're just going to go up and share it briefly in whatever time you have. And I was like, so I was jet lagged. I was exhausted. We were getting up the next morning at 4 a.m. to go on a sunrise tour of Angkor Wat. It was about 9:30 at night or so at this point, 8:30, 9:30 at night. So it took a huge amount of courage for me to get to this symposium. It took a huge amount of courage for me to put myself out there, sign up for this open mic. I only had 5 minutes, so I got up and I said, I'm going to share my sound and energy, quantum sound and energy healing method called dimensional frequency expansion. Normally I would tell you about it. I only have 5 minutes. So I'm just going to call each layer of these 7 layers of frequency in, let you experience them, feel them in your body, and then very briefly I'm going to weave them together. And I did all that in 5 minutes. I called in each layer vocally, shared the light language, shared the sound, the song for each layer, did a little bit of a journey, and that was it in my 5 minutes. So I had the courage to get up and do that. And all of that required an immense amount of courage. So when I looked a little deeper in that picture, beyond or alongside all the 3D programming stuff that came up about judging myself about how I looked and all of that, I recognized the immense courage that I had to even be there, to be standing in front of that microphone, letting people see me. The vulnerability of sharing light language in a space where I had no idea how people would respond. This was a global crystal bowl symposium. There were actually many other vocal sound healers there, which was amazing, but I had no idea when I first got there if anybody else would be doing vocal work, if anybody would know what light language was, if anybody would be interested in it. So it took a huge amount of courage and vulnerability to share that. And then as I thought back about the experience, as I excavated even deeper, what happened after that was that so many people came up to me to thank me for my courage, to thank me for my vulnerability, to ask me about light language, to ask me. One woman came up and said, I don't know what you were singing, but it spoke to my soul, which is a lot of times how light language gets awakened. It's like, I remember this. There's a cellular quantum memory of being in another space and knowing that this sound is part of your lineage in some way. There was one woman who I had kind of a private conversation with who has been working with light language and the Arcturians and is in a space of not being able to share that with anyone else in her life other than this small group that she's in online. And there was a huge response. Like, she actually started crying in this conversation because she had never told anybody about this before. And she told me some things that she was experiencing on this trip around this. And it was like a coming out party. It was a spiritual coming out party for her to talk about this with someone, to talk about her experiences, to have somebody know what she was talking about and reflect back non-judgment and support and love about that. And right away I realized that this one moment captured on this photograph that made me so uncomfortable when I first looked at it because all of that 3D stuff came up, I can have that experience and I can look deeper and find the expansion. And underneath that, what I found was this immense courage of me demonstrating the courage, demonstrating the vulnerability, and how that rippled out and affected people. So many people came up to me and had some sort of a response to that. And if I hadn't been able to dig down and find that courage and find that vulnerability and the authenticity to just be like, this is who I am and this is what I do. And I had no idea at that point, honestly, how that would be judged, if it would be judged harshly, if it would be received well, if the people would think I was crazy. I did not know any of these people. It was the second night there, and the first night was just kind of It was just a night. So it was the first full day, essentially. We were in programming all day. There wasn't really a lot of time to get to know each other. So it was a big risk for me. And I was able to see, when I excavated deeper, looking at that image, just how much 5D expansion there was in that experience, just how much that courage rippled out and inspired other people to have courage and inspired other people to be vulnerable and perhaps awakened other people's cellular memories of being in these amazing frequencies that are so close to the source of what we are. Everyone has some familiarity with them. Whether they're aware of it or not is another thing. So that's the first picture. The second picture is a really amazing story. I'm surprised I haven't gotten emotional yet, so maybe it's coming, or maybe it came before when I was thinking about what I was going to talk about before I started the show. So in the second picture, I'm standing next to a tree. I've got my hand on the tree, and I believe this is actually a candid photo. It looks like I'm looking at the photographer, but I'm not smiling. I'm not really posed. And the first thing I noticed was the ridiculous hat on my head and how silly it looked. I was wearing it for sun protection, and I thought, why did I not take that hat off for this picture? That's another reason I know it was candid, because if it was posed, I might have thought to take the hat off. Did not. So I'm red and sweaty again because we were outside. It was about 95 with like 90% humidity. I realized I didn't do it on purpose, but I'm wearing kind of like a turquoise shirt and then this like turquoise or light blue hat. And I thought I looked like a big, huge, sweaty Smurf. I am standing at an angle that's very unflattering. So again, I noticed like how wide I looked. I'm carrying my backpack. I look like I'm like on this big trek. And that was the first thing. Those are the first things I noticed, these 3D judgments. And I pretty quickly excavated further down in this because I'd already done it with the first picture. And the story behind this picture, beneath this picture, beyond this 3D reaction to this picture, is so expansive and amazing that it would have been a tragedy if I had missed it because I was just focused on the 3D. But again, both of these things can exist simultaneously. I haven't suddenly healed all of my body image issues. I haven't suddenly healed my typically negative reaction to seeing myself in photographs. I was able to have that and excavate deeper, which led to this huge expansion of the memory of what was happening during this picture. So let me tell you the story of what was happening just before this picture was taken. So one of the days we had a choice of 2 different excursions to go on. And one of them was to this temple called Ta Prohm. And they're very proud this temple was featured in the Tomb Raider movie, which I looked up was in 2001, so a while ago. And essentially it's this space where this temple had been abandoned. It's no longer used. And so these giant trees have essentially been taking over. And the roots of these trees are like the size, larger than the size of a person. In one place, they were growing through a doorway, and the entire root was taking up this doorway that was bigger than a person in order for a person to walk through. So these trees are massive. They are immense. They reminded me, at least in height, of like redwood trees or sequoia trees. They weren't quite that wide around, but some of them were quite wide. You can see in the picture the scale because I'm basically standing next to the root and the base of the tree. You can't even see anything but the trunk. I took one video, I maybe will put that in the Instagram, where I kind of panned up so you can see how immense these trees actually were. So right away, before I ever got over there, I was like, that's the excursion I'm going on. I knew it. But I felt these trees like calling to me. Before I ever left the US, I was like, there's something about these trees that I could just feel it through the images, that I wanted to be in the presence of these trees. And then we were very busy, so I didn't think much about it. We were going from thing to thing, and there was a lot of programming, classes and events and so much sound, so much amazing sound. But the night before, especially, about 2 nights before we went, I started feeling again this call from these trees. And the night before we went to this temple, which was later in the afternoon, the next day, the trees started communicating with me. And I could hear them singing. I could hear this song. And it wasn't one of my songs. I knew it was their song. And they said, "We want you to sing to us." And right away, that brought up the 3D programming. It's like, oh, how am I going to do that? And that's going to be weird. And people are going to think I'm crazy, or they're going to think I'm showing off or something. Because I was in this group. I mean, couldn't have gone with a better group because it was a group of sound healers. But like, I didn't want somebody to think I was like performing or something. This was like this deep call of something that I absolutely felt like I had to do. Sorry, I'm still getting over a little bit of a respiratory thing. So I could hear this song like plain as day in my head. It was loud. It was very primal. It was very wild feeling. And I thought, oh my gosh, am I really going to go and just belt out this song? Because that's what the trees were asking me for. And I told a few people, I'm like, oh, the trees are asking me to sing. And they were kind of like, that's amazing. You should do it. And again, wonderful, supportive place to be with other people who are used to and understanding of the power and magic of sound. So we got to this temple. It was like 3 p.m. It was one of the hottest days we were there. The sun was actually out. Luckily, the trees are so big. We were mostly in the shade, which is another reason why I was like, why was I wearing that stupid hat? But I was wearing the stupid hat for shade, and on the walk to the temple, we were definitely in the sun, and then it just never occurred to me till later to take it off. So we were walking into this temple. It's all outside. You go into the temple, but there were rooms that still had ceilings, but a lot of it is kind of in ruins. And so we walked down this big wide road, and right away I could hear the trees, and I'm like, all right, I will sing to you. You tell me which tree to go to, and I will sing to you. And it felt like the whole forest wanted me to sing to it, but there was like a specific tree that was going to call me over, and I was going to put my hands on the tree and I was going to sing. So we're walking along, and I'm looking around, and I'm like, all right, who is it? Who is it? You know, kind of waiting to see. And we got just to the edge of the ruins. We hadn't actually gone into the temple yet, which turned out to be a good thing. And this tree right away calls to me, and I'm like, oh, that's the tree. So right away I had the 3D stuff coming up, you know, oh, should I really do this? What is it going to look like? Are they going to think I'm trying to like put on a performance? Are they going to think I'm weird? You know, like all of that stuff. But it was like one of those moments where like my body and my intuition took over. And if I had tried to stop myself, I'm not sure I could have. And it's very interesting because it turns out someone else was drawn to that tree. And while I was singing, he was actually pouring his water bottle on the roots. And afterwards, I joked around because I said I thought someone was peeing next to me because I could hear the water. But I was like in another place and it didn't matter. Like I was like, whatever's happening next to me is just like part of this experience. So I walked up to this tree and I put my hands on this tree and I sang the song to the tree. It was the tree's song. And the feeling I had was like, this has been their song for long before these specific trees were even here, like millennia. But it had been hundreds of years since they've been able to hear it out loud. Like the trees are singing it silently to each other. But there was something so sacred and special about them being able to hear this song. And I went for it. It was loud. It was echoing through this entire forest. And I was completely unaware of anything going on around me other than I could hear the water kind of being poured on the roots while I was singing. When I opened my eyes, I looked, there was another symposium attendee next to me, kind of also with the hand on the tree, kind of eyes closed, just having a moment with the tree. The same tree had called to both of us. And people had stopped to watch, which it was loud, so I don't blame them for that. And I think I felt like there was an understanding of that this was kind of a sacred, special moment. And I think a couple people videoed it, and one of the women said she was going to send me the video, but it didn't come out. She said the image and the sound came out all weird and distorted, which I thought was really interesting. I don't know if anyone else took a video, if any of the other videos came out. And I didn't do it for that. I did it for the tree. I did it because they asked me to. And at the end of this song, as I was just sitting in silence, feeling the reaction of these trees, they were so grateful to have heard their song that they gifted me their energy, and they told me anywhere I am in the world now, I can reach down through the root system, through that mycelial network in the earth, and access the energy of these amazing trees. And I'm not a tree person necessarily. I mean, I don't dislike trees, and trees have amazing energy, but there was a special connection with these trees that I don't really have words to describe. It felt like being cradled in warmth and love and joy, and also the immense power that was coming up through the earth in order to allow these trees to grow as tall as they were. And I am still in communication with these trees. And so when I dug deeper in that picture, I believe that picture was taken pretty soon after I finished that, like after I kind of came back and turned and began to like come away from the tree, which I had to do kind of slowly. And if I stopped at my 3D judgments of that picture, I never would have re-experienced that moment right before that picture was taken, where I heard the song of these trees, I sang it back to them, and I received so much gratitude from them. And interestingly, after I was done, one of the amazing women in charge of this symposium came over to me, and she said, just so you know, it's okay that you did that outside of the temple, but we're not allowed to sing inside the temple. It's part of their rules. And she said, you can be quiet, you can, silently do something or very like under your breath, but you can't sing out loud like that. And it's just very amazing to me that I was led to a tree outside of the temple, because they're all connected, and they wanted to hear that song. And the power in that song, part of me wishes I did have a recording of it, because I don't actually remember exactly what I sang. I remember the power of it. I remember the tree's response to hearing their own song sung back to them out loud after years and years and years of just basically like having a song stuck in your head for years, and then having someone come and sing it back to you and being able to hear it with your actual ears, whatever constitutes tree ears. It was such a powerful, special, amazing moment. And it's essentially captured in that photograph. Every time now I look at that photograph, beyond all the judgments, I can see and feel the memory of what happened there. So by excavating deeper down, by going deeper within, I was able to, again, not dispel the 3D stuff that came up. It's still there. I still think I look like a big sweaty Smurf in that picture with the silly looking hat on. That's the 3D judgment. It's still there. It's not gone. And I can excavate down further and remember and re-experience the incredible expansion and awakening that existed when I was in communication and harmony with those trees and honoring their sacred request to hear their own song for the first time in what they're say are like is like hundreds of years. Whew, I made it through that without crying. Not that there would be anything wrong with if I did start crying, but I thought it's a very emotional memory because it was a very powerful moment. So hopefully those examples show you in a more concrete way what I'm talking about when first of all, let's talk just briefly again about the courage. It took me an immense amount of courage to do that for the trees because of the 3D judgments that came up around, what are people going to think of me? Am I going to be judged? Am I allowed to do it? Which it was one of those ask for forgiveness, not permission moments, I think. All of that required a great amount of courage. And I think that's illustrated anytime we can start in that 3D space. And again, not necessarily release all of that stuff, because we're never going to release it all. There's always going to be judgments that come up. There's always going to be cultural programming. I think one of the misconceptions of spiritual work, I used to have it myself, is that we're going to get to a point where we no longer deal with that stuff. And I just don't think that's true. I think what's true is that we get to a point where we no longer stop at those things, where we have the courage to move beyond them, to allow them to exist, to soften to them enough that we can dig down below them. And by doing that, we allow space for expansion. And we can expand beyond that ego-driven 3D fear-based view and into the 5D expansion of the courage of stepping into the power of the experience, whether it's love, whether it's overcoming something, whether it is courage, whether it's allowing yourself to be authentic to who you are. If I had not sung to those trees, that would have been an inauthentic experience, and I would have carried regret with me. If I had toned down my singing and kind of just done it quietly under my breath, that would have been an inauthentic experience. So by allowing the 3D judgments to be there, digging down deeper and coming into a space of authenticity and honoring what I was being asked to do by these trees, by myself, by my higher self, my soul, whatever word you want to use for that, by the intuition, the source energy that I'm made of, I was able to move beyond, to expand out from that 3D view into the 5D, into something that felt unconditionally loving, something allowed me to receive. These trees gave me an incredible gift that I'm so grateful for because I was able to give them something. It was an exchange. I gave them their song that they hadn't been able to hear out loud for hundreds of years, and in gratitude, they gave me the gift of carrying their energy with me. And it has completely changed my relationship to grounding. I've gotten much better at grounding over the years. But now when I ground, all I have to do is think of the roots of those trees, and I can immediately feel my sacral chakra spreading, my root chakra kind of spreading down. That image that people always give of growing roots into the ground that never really worked for me for grounding, I can energetically feel that in my body now because I'm so connected to these trees. I've been working on a crown opening, which is a really scary thing for me. That may end up being a whole show on its own. And one of the things the trees told me, they said, look up at our crown and notice it's not a solid opening. It's the branches that extend out, and between the branches the light comes in. And they told me if you open your crown like branches, like a tree, like we do, you will have the stability of the branches kind of still holding a structure there, but then the light can come in between the structure, because I was thinking that I had to just completely open myself. And as a child, when I was completely open, I was completely overwhelmed. So they gifted me with this view of my own energetic body as a tree, and they gifted me the feeling of their actual energy so that I can, like as I'm talking about this, I can feel the roots of the tree. I can actually put my hand out and physically almost feel the solid feeling of these trees, the loving patience, the wisdom, the expansion. And if I was unable to move past the 3D, again, not dispelling it, not releasing it, not getting rid of it, allowing it to be there, softening beyond it, digging beneath it, whatever, it's kind of a combination. If I had not been able to go deeper within myself, I would not have found the expansion. I would not have been able to accept, I wouldn't have had the receptivity to accept the gift that was being offered to me by those trees. So this is really profound work, but it can be done in a fairly simple way. So all I did was look at 2 photographs of myself, and I had the knee-jerk reaction I always do to seeing photos of myself. that is unfavorable. I don't like them. I thought, I never want to see these again. That was my first reaction. Like, oh, they did get a couple pictures of me and they're both bad because I'm bad and I'm ugly and I'm this and I'm that. All of that stuff came up and I could have stopped there. And many, 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 many times in the past, especially with images of myself, I have. That's all I see in the image. But because of all the work I've done, all I did was take it one step further. All I did was soften beyond that and say, wait a minute, what was happening in this moment? What was actually going on here? Beyond that surface, beyond that 3D, beyond that shallow kind of fear-based view, all I did was take a moment and soften and dig down. And I found so much rich expansion in that experience that seeing those photographs brought me back into the experience of this amazingly expanded growth experience that I just went through. And I would have completely missed that if I had stopped. So all it took was sitting a little bit with the discomfort of what came up in the 3D, not running from the discomfort, because that's what we tend to do. Ooh, this is uncomfortable. I'm putting these away. I never want to see them again. I just sat with it for a minute. Ew, I don't like the way these pictures look. And what was going on behind the scenes here? What was going on at a deeper level? What was the energetics of this moment? What was the emotion of this moment? Not what is the emotion I'm having now. What is the emotion of the moment? What was the experience I was having in that moment? When somebody was observing me and took a picture and I was unaware of it, what was happening deeper down in my system? And what was happening in both instances were huge moments of courage that led me into a 5D expansion. We cannot expand into the 5D without courage. It is an essential ingredient. I was just thinking this picture my guides just gave me was like a pantry. This has come up a couple times recently. You know, you have staples in your pantry that are always there. And if you want to bake or you want to cook, like you got to have flour, you got to have sugar, you got to have vanilla extract. There's things that you have to have as staples in your pantry in order to create. Think of all the amazing things you can make out of those simple ingredients. You know, if you have some cocoa powder, you can make brownies, you can make cookies. If you can make bread, you know, if you have some yeast, like there's these staple ingredients out of which you can make an infinite number of baked goods in this analogy. One of the staples of 5D expansion is courage. If you have courage, you can sit with the discomfort of what's coming up for you in the 3D, in the ego space, in the fear-based, cultural, familial programming, the trauma history, all of that stuff. If you have the courage to sit with that and not run from it, because our fear a lot of times is that it will completely overwhelm us. And in the past, for a lot of us, it has. And that is part of this invitation. That is part of this shift. Is like, oh, yep, I've got all these like body image issues still. I've got all these judgments of myself and how I look and how I'll never look as good as other people and I'll never dress as well as other people and I don't wear makeup and I look hot and I look sweaty, all of that stuff. And if we have the courage to just be with that for a minute and not let that scare us off, then we have the opportunity to dig deeper. And that takes courage. What's underneath this? Because I was thinking about this, I asked the Spiritual Integration Sanctuary members to bring a photo for the exercise that we're going to do together. And I was thinking of a specific photo of myself that I have somewhere around. And it's a picture of me deep in my anorexia eating disorder years when I was in college. And I used to keep this picture as inspiration or more like self-flagellation to try to get myself to stop eating and try to lose weight and all of that. And if I look beneath the surface of that picture, because in that picture, that's one of the only pictures I've ever seen of myself where I'm like, I don't look fat. But underneath the surface of that, because that was always the 3D goal for me, I need to look thin. I need to look good. I need to look pretty. I need to look attractive. And I don't. I have kind of a funny look on my face. It's a candid picture. But if I look beneath the surface of that picture, I can remember and re-experience the absolute loneliness and isolation I felt. The understanding that had not yet dawned for me that I would never be good enough to be happy. I would never lose enough weight to be happy. I could never look good enough in my face to be happy. I could never have good enough hair. When I look under the surface of that, all I see is how trapped in my 3D not enoughness or too muchness I was. But if I hadn't gone through that, if I look even deeper, that is at the time in my life when I was first starting to work with my first mentor, Sherry Ford, who I mention on the show all the time, who was my therapist. That was the beginning of my excavation. Now I'm going to get emotional. And I have so much love and compassion for that version of myself. Looking back at that now, with the expansion that I have gained, the pain that I was in prompted me to get help, to start more deeply excavating, to start this process of expansion that's been going on for over 20 years now, that has led me to a point where I can hear trees asking me to sing to them, where I can stand up in front of people I've never met and vulnerably, is that a word? Express and call through these dimensional frequencies that are absolutely life-changing, and give people a chance to experience those. Give people a chance to tap into their own light language, to tap into their own expansion. So even if we're looking at something that under the surface, there's still the 3D pain, if we can sit with the discomfort of that pain, we can look even deeper and recognize the courage it took to simply be alive in that moment. Now I kind of wish I'd share that picture. I don't know where it is, but it was an act of courage for me to just keep going. And because I was able to keep going, because I was able to find the courage over and over and over again to keep excavating, to keep expanding, to keep excavating, to keep expanding, now I hold the space to help other people to do the same thing. And I get to go to places like Cambodia and take a leap into a larger space for myself so that I can continue to expand and be with other people holding that space, so that I can come back and hold a bigger space. And you can see how all of this ripples out. This is how the collective changes. These internal shifts that we make. They're not fixing ourselves. They're not quote unquote healing ourselves. The healing is the acceptance. The healing is the softening. The healing is me saying, you know what? I might end up being 70 years old and I still might look at a picture of myself and the first thing I'm going to notice is how I don't look good enough. I don't look the way I want to look. But I also know that under the surface of that, if I dig deeper down, I'm going to find the courage of that moment. I'm going to find the expansion in that moment, even if the expansion was just that I kept going. Whew. So if you are enjoying the show, if you want more episodes, more interaction, more activation, join us in the Spiritual Integration Sanctuary. There's a link in the show notes. We would love to have you explore and grow this 5D community with us. You are unconditional love. The very fabric of your being is that light of source. And there is nothing you need to do to receive that. It is not earned. It is not only received when you are fully healed, when you've released fear or limiting beliefs or judgments of self and others. The work of this internal 3D to 5D shift is yes and. Yes, I have fears and limitations and doubts and judgments, and I choose to expand. And I choose to allow myself to receive the unconditional love that I am made of. Have a beautiful rest of your day or evening, and I will see you on the next episode of Wind Down Wednesdays.